I'm Stephanie and I am with Spinstress in the Making, my blog, and I will be working on the Sewcialites number 26 Courageous block today. It'll be the 9-inch block, and for your background you're going to need 3 1/4 inch squares and 2 3 1/8 inch squares, and these will actually be cut diagonally once, and these will be wings for our block. And then for your print, you're going to need 1 5 3/8 inch square that is cut once diagonally. Then you're going to also need 3 4 1/2 inch squares and 4 2 3/4 inch squares full. And for my background blocks that are the 3 1/4 inch, these actually have a line drawn on the back of them with a fusion pen, and we're going to be sewing on either sides of these eventually. But before any of this, these would have been whole, and you need to cut your C and your B fabrics once diagonally. And then we will start working with our D and A fabrics. So we'll take these first and make sure that your good sides are facing up and sandwiched together for these. You'll take your backgrounds and put them directly on top, and you're going to be sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides of the line that you've drawn. You'll cut in the middle, and then you will press towards your print fabric or whichever fabric is your dark side. So I'll be sewing on both sides with a 1/4 inch seam allowance for all of these blocks. Cut, press, and come back to you for those. Okay, so I have assembled my half triangle squares, and I've trimmed them down to 2 3/4 inch squares. And now we can start putting 2 of our sections together. So you can take your C diagonal, place it like this, and then you're going to take 2 of your B pieces, and you're going to line them up kind of like this, facing your other triangle. And you'll take one of your half triangle squares and put it here. So what we're going to do is we're going to assemble this side first. So we'll fold these down, making sure that you have a nice 90-degree angle right here. So with 1/4 inch seam allowance, press up, trim away any extra fabric, and it will press up like this. And then you'll take your other one, making sure that you have a 90-degree angle down here at the bottom. So with a 1/4 inch seam allowance up, and press out like this, and then we'll have this half triangle, and then we'll be able to sew it onto our full half triangle of our 5 3/8 inch block that we originally had. So I'm going to do that for both of these. Scoot this down like this. Lie these out. And take another one of my squares, making sure that my print is pointing towards my other print, that they're going to connect right here and here when we're done sewing. So I will sew these together, this part together first, then come back to you and we'll come together and sew these full units together. All right, so I have finished sewing my 2 half triangles onto the sides of my half triangle squares. I've pressed out towards the triangle flaps just to make it easier, and it will lie flatter in the middle over here. And as you can see, it pretty much lines up perfectly with the diagonal side raw edge of my top print triangle in the bottom. So now what you're going to do is you're going to fold these over, making sure they match up on the edges and make a nice square. And you're going to sew on this edge right here and here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I would suggest pressing towards your print for this one once you're done, and that will give us our 2 square units that will measure about 5 inches total. Okay, so I have finished making our 2 cat's cradle units, and they measure 5 inches square total. And we can set these aside now and we can work on our other units. So we'll be taking our 4 fabric E blocks and putting them together with our half triangle units. So you're gonna have your print blocks diagonal from each other and your half triangle squares diagonal from each other as well, making sure that your background fabric is in the middle pointing towards each other, and your print pretty much makes a nice bordering effect on these. So we'll form these two. Like this. And then we'll sew these strips together and then make sure that you press towards your print square or the square that is darkest for you, but I would consider pressing them towards this one because we'll make it easier with these corner bits here. And then after that, we'll fold them down and sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and this will enable us to have a nice snug point right here in the middle of our block. So I will sew these rows together first, and then we'll fold down and sew, and I'll come back to you once I have completed finishing these blocks. Alright, so I have finished sewing my blocks together. On the back, I have pressed that middle seam open just so it lies a little flatter. And now that these are complete, we can bring back in our cat's cradle blocks. And so what we'll do is we'll have them go diagonally from each other with our big print squares pointing outwards. And then we will also be putting in our other blocks, making sure that your print is also in these corners as well. And now what we can do is we can sew these strips together here and here, and then I will press the opposite sides of each other. I'll probably be pressing towards this side since it has more of my darker print on it, so pressing towards this way, and that way I have a nice little sandwich right in the middle when I fold this top panel down to sew across. So I'll come back to you once I have sewn these two pieces together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and then pressed it, and then I'll come back, fold it down, show you how we're going to sew it, and we will be complete for our block. So I have finished sewing my first and second panel together. I even used a little bit of starch just to make it lie a little flatter when I was pressing it, and I've pressed towards the block that has the majority of my pink print fabric in it. So that way when I fold this down, these will sandwich really nice together here. I'll sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance right here all the way across, and then I can press it open probably or to one side, but I probably will press that seam open just so it lies a little flatter. Whatever works best for you, I guess, at this point. So I will take this. I tend to pin a little bit when I get to the full block, especially in areas where I want my joints to meet well. But of course, when I sew with my 1/4 inch seam allowance, I pull those pins out right before I get to them so that my machine doesn't accidentally hit them, because that can be very bad for your machine. If your machine hits a pin, it could actually cause the tension and the sequencing of it sending it down to pick up that bobbin thread. It can send that off, so then you can have missed stitches and other things, and in the long term it's just best to take your pins out so that you don't have to take it into the shop to get it back and fixed because it hit a pin and did something bad to your machine. So I will fold this down, so with the 1/4 inch seam allowance, probably press it open, and we will have this finished courage block for the Sewcialites. So I have finished sewing my block together. As you can see, I did press that middle seam open all the way with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And overall, I'm pretty happy with the block. It's lying really nice and flat. And it's a really pretty block. It's definitely a more traditional block, which is more to my liking and style. And it wasn't too hard to do. I actually kind of prefer doing these cat's cradles to flying geese, honestly. And I've also have practiced with this at least. Another block that I've done incorporated that a lot, and I used it for my full quilt. So I was able to pull out some of the old muscle memory for these parts at least. But overall, I really like the block, and I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to my channel. You can also check me out at Spinstress Station on Weebly to check out all my other projects. It could be knitting, it could be cooking, anything else really craft-wise that I do. And I will be seeing you next week for the number 27 block from Sewcialites.